Okay, so we're back again. We just finished talking about the Feast of Tabernacles, and we're here in front of our gracious host, Dorit, brought us over. Any questions you guys have about, I mean, we're in prophetic times. We've got the two-state solution coming up in Israel, I mean, in the United Nations in New York City on Tuesday through the end of the week. And it's already been decided. I happen to know that there's a preliminary vote, I'll drink a little water here, that something like 140 nations to 10 have voted in favor of dividing the land of Israel. And then,
How are they going to divide it?
okay, so and so the question from Janet is, how would they divide it? So what they're planning on doing is taking Gaza, and Gaza is famous in the Bible for being the home of Goliath of Gath and the Philistines. And the Philistines were an Indo-European people that came across the Mediterranean Sea during the 400-year captivity of Israel in Egypt. And they took the land of Israel and made it Philistia. And they had Nephilim super soldiers as part of their army, meaning giants. And so when Israel finally got back into the land again, after they crossed over the Jordan River, we all know the famous story about David, who was a shepherd boy, facing this monster who terrified the Israeli army so much that they refused to go out and fight him. And David, just a little shepherd boy, was like, who is this uncircumcised Philistine to insult the name of the God of Israel? And nobody's going to go out and fight him? He's like, I'll do it myself. So King Saul said, all right, take my armor and go out there and fight him in my armor. But the armor was too big for him because he was just a kid. He said, don't worry about it. I'm a shepherd. And whenever the bears and the lions attack my sheep, I hit him with a rock. So he took a slingshot, and he took like 5 extra stones because Goliath had brothers. And he planned to kill all of them with a rock. And sure enough, the greatest super soldier in the history of the nation of the Philistines was killed with a stone to the head by David at the hand of God. And that's where you get the term Palestinian from. And so the two-state solution, which is coming up for a vote at the United Nations this coming Tuesday, is a misnomer. The term Palestinian or Palestine isn't the name of that area. It's Gaza. Gaza was a part of the land of Israel. It's where the Philistines came in as squatters. When Israel was captive and they abandoned the house, you guys own real estate or whatever, like there's a squatter's law. If you come in and you abandon your house, you're going to have people living in your house when you get back. So when they got back into the land, the nation of Philistia had come across the Mediterranean Sea, Indo-European people, not Arab people, not Semitic people. They weren't Jews, they weren't Arabs. They weren't Semitic, they weren't descendants of Shem, like all the Arabs and all of the Jews are the sons of Shem, who was the son of Noah. None of the Philistines were sons of Shem. So the people you have living in the land of Israel now in Gaza, who call themselves Palestinians, aren't Palestinians, because there's no such thing as a Palestinian, because the Palestinians, who were the Philistines, were either killed off during the wars with Israel centuries before the birth of Christ, and what was left interbred with the surrounding nations. So there are no more Philistine people alive in the world. But the term Palestine is a term that was used for the first time in 135 AD, not BC. So 100 years after the crucifixion of Jesus, the Romans were demanding that the Jews stop rebelling against their rule and adopt Jupiter and Venus and the gods of the Greco-Roman pantheon as co-gods. They could have their God Yahweh, but you have to have our gods too. And because the Jews, to their credit, they're stiff-necked and don't always obey the Lord, but many of them were faithful, and the Bar Kokhba rebellion came up, and they had a group of people who refused to bow the knee to Rome. And Rome got so upset that they invaded Jerusalem, and they accidentally burnt down the temple on the very same day that 500 years earlier, Nebuchadnezzar burned down the first temple, or destroyed the first temple. So in 70 AD, the temple was destroyed because God wanted it to be destroyed because he didn't want any more blood sacrifices from animals. Why? To force Israel to come to Jesus as the Passover lamb instead of going to lambs as the Passover lamb. He did the same thing with the Babylonian captivity. He sent Nebuchadnezzar to destroy the temple and take Israel captive for 70 years so that the land could enjoy her Sabbath rest. So God allowed the Romans, actually caused them to destroy the second temple, but that same year in 70 AD, a law was passed that any Jew caught within 100 miles of the Temple Mount could be killed by anyone, sight unseen, without any ramifications. So most of the Jews, departed from the land of Israel in 70 AD, except for a hardy group of nationalists and patriots that fought for Israel for another 65 years. Up till 135 AD, they fought. And finally, they actually took over, and I went to Israel when I was, in my second year law school doing my study abroad at Tel Aviv University. I got a chance to tour the nation, and I actually got to climb up that mountain called Mount Masada to a Roman fortress. The Roman fortress at the top of Mount Masada was taken over by the Jews and used as the outpost for their rebellion against Rome. And Rome took years. They had to build a rampart from the ground up to the top of the mountain where the fortress was. Eventually, they built a rampart, took years to do it, and by the time they got there, the rebels, knowing that the fight was over, sadly, they self-deleted themselves. They committed the S word because they didn't want to live as Roman slaves. And so they found all the Jews dead rather than bowing the knee to Rome and worshiping Jupiter and Venus and all the pagan gods of Rome. And from 135 AD onward, Caesar in Rome got so mad at the Jews for embarrassing him for all these years by rebelling like no other nation had been able to do. And they didn't have an army, they didn't have any resources, but they had their love for the God of the Bible and their tradition. And so Caesar renamed Israel Provincia Syria Palestina, which is Latin for the Roman province of Syria Palestine. If you translate that into English, that Palestina is translated in English as Palestine. So that area, from the time that the Romans co-opted the land in 135 AD, has been called Palestine. And all of a sudden in 1968, Yasser Arafat, who himself was part Egyptian and maybe Jordanian as well, and all of those other Arabs that were living in what's the land of Israel, those people were all Jordanian or Egyptian. They were rechristened Palestinians by Yasser Arafat because we'll create a whole new group of people and call ourselves Palestinians. Palestinians were always Jews before 1968. The Palestinian Symphony Orchestra was an all-Jewish orchestra that was in the land of Israel even before 1948. So you had to be Jewish to be in the Palestinian orchestra. But Yasser Arafat, an enemy of Israel, rechristened his movement the Palestinian movement. And that name has been used by the UN ever since. And so they're going to supposedly create a Palestinian state. But you can't create a Palestinian state because the Palestinians are the Philistines who stopped existing centuries before the birth of Christ. So that's an aside, but there you have it. Any other questions out there in the audience? We got look at our people here. We've got a beautiful setting that Dorit gave us. Say hello. There's Dorit. There's our hostess. She's the gracious person that did all this. Look at these flowers, man. She's an interior designer as well as a designer of clothes. So if you need any business, contact Dorit. Her phone number is on the message I sent out to all you guys, and it's also on my Facebook page, South Beach Gospel Ministries.
Like I said, the devil gonna make a really serious movie of 4 hours, movie with intermission, the real deal. You would be the guy.
So Max says, yeah, he says you should be in pictures. So, and that's why we have a YouTube page. So again, not to belabor the point, but for those of us here that are biblical Christians, and all you guys are, man, we are in prophetic times like never before in the history of the planet Earth. This is the most exciting week for a born-again Christian, maybe in the history of the planet Earth. You've got all this stuff going on. You've got, even if the rapture doesn't happen on Tuesday, you've got the New York Post ran an article about the rapture this week because so many people around the world have been talking about how the Feast of Trumpets is a type. We've got special effects here. The Feast of Trumpets is a type of the rapture, and then you had famously, a pastor in South Africa said that he had a vision from God that it was going to occur. And so whether it does or not, this gives us an excellent opportunity to go out and preach the gospel. And man, I'll tell you, after Charlie Kirk's assassination, last week, a bunch of us, people were like, "Hey, Pastor, are you going to be okay going out there?" One of our subscribers from Australia is like, "Man, you go out there, are you safe?" The actuality, no, we're not safe.
Nobody's safe.
And we aren't supposed to be safe. The media doesn't want us to know that, but the fact is that, and we talked about that last Saturday. We talked about our last teaching on our YouTube page. For those of you who haven't yet, like and subscribe, YouTube, South Beach Gospel Ministries. Last week we talked about Christian martyrdom in America and how it's on the rise. You remember those school kids, first day of school, they're in their chapel at their church school praying, when a transcontinental alphabet letter person who has a persuasion that thinks that Christians are, making it harder to be alphabet letter and transcontinental, so I'm going to go kill a bunch of kids. And they shot the kids while they were in there praying, and 2 children died, and 20 others were shot. So I said, man, in the last 3 weeks, you've got over 20 Christians shot, and 3 of them died because they were Christians and spoke out in favor of the Bible and the values in the Bible. So persecution in the church has been going on since, I said last week, I said, Stephen, anybody remember Stephen? Stephen in the book of Acts had just been voted in as a deacon, and he gave his first open air preaching. His very first sermon, before he got to the end of it, they stoned him to death. It was so powerful, and you got to read that. Acts chapter 7, I think it is. Stephen laid out the entire history of the nation of Israel, and a bunch of the Pharisees, who were led by a young guy by the name of Saul of Tarsus, who was persecuting and arresting Christians and putting them to death. He said, let me take your coats, you guys get the stones and take care of this guy. So Paul sent these Pharisees and religious ultra conservatives from Israel to kill Stephen the martyr during his first sermon. One of the most powerful passages, overviews in all of the Bible. The Faith Hall of Fame in Hebrew chapter 11, and Stephen the martyr's message in, I think it was Acts 7. Man, powerful. But this guy named Saul, who years later was on his way north to Damascus to arrest a bunch of Christian women and children, got knocked off his horse by none other than Jesus himself. And when he said, "Oh man, he said, Paul, why are you persecuting me?" He said, "Well, who are you? I can't see. Who are you? The light blinded me." He said, "It's me, Jesus, that you're persecuting." And to his credit, from that instant onward, Paul was like, "Oh, I didn't know. I thought you were a myth. And I didn't know that. Now I understand." And Paul became the most powerful advocate for the gospel of Jesus Christ that's ever lived, right? He wrote 70% of the New Testament after Jesus smacked him off his horse. And when Paul was sent to Peter and James and John to learn all the things about the gospel of Jesus, because they were with Jesus for the 3-year earthly ministry, they were like, "We're not having anything to do with this guy's a killer and a hater of the church. We don't want anything to do with him." Paul couldn't, even the apostles wouldn't have anything to do with him. Peter, James, and John wouldn't have anything to do with him. So Barnabas, who was a believer, felt sorry for him and took him under his wing and became his first street evangelism partner. And then Silas after that. But Jesus had to teach Paul the gospel because none of the disciples would have anything to do with him because they were afraid of him. They thought he was some kind of a plant, a double agent or something. So Jesus taught him everything, and that's why he wrote 70% of the New Testament, and that's why we get the most detailed information about the pre-tribulation rapture from Paul, even more so than Peter or any of the others. John gives us, the Last Supper, John chapter 14, verses 1, 2, and 3, but Paul really. And so when Paul was sent to the church to get assistance, I'm a new believer, I need friends, I need fellowship. And one of the guys that the Lord sent him to, he said, "Man, Lord, this guy Paul, he's a bad dude, man. He's been killing Christians, and he's working for the Sanhedrin, the Jewish Supreme Court, to stamp out all of us." And he said, no, take him in and teach him the stuff. I must show him all the things that he must suffer for my name. So Paul's reward for converting to Christ was a lifetime of imprisonment and persecution and rejection. And Paul was, in my estimation, was killed at least 3 times, and the Lord brought him back to life. Remember, they took him outside the city and stoned him to death, just like they did Stephen. An hour later, he woke up, walked back into town, and started preaching the gospel. I think he was dead, and he supernaturally came back to life because his ministry wasn't over. But then after he had, taught Titus and Timothy all of the things they needed to know and made them the young pastors of the church, God allowed the Romans to arrest him, right? He had been in Roman custody for years when he wrote most of the Bible. But this last time, he didn't get out again. This last time, God allowed Satan to have them decapitate him in the dungeon prison of the Mamertine prison outside of Rome. So both Peter and Paul ended their ministries in Rome. Peter was naked on a cross upside down, and Paul was a headless horseman. His head was rolling around on the dungeon floor. That's how their ministries ended. None of them went to the retirement villa on the Sea of Galilee. None of them had a TV ministry on TBN and made millions of dollars and sent out magic prayer cloths. None of them asked for tithes. Tithing, by the way, another controversial topic, not as controversial as the rapture, but close. Tithing isn't biblical for the church. There is no church tithing in the Bible, but most people don't. I got in trouble when I was at Calvary's men group years ago. My very first time there, like, who is this guy? I said, tithing, there isn't a verse in the Bible about church tithing. And they were like, yo, sure there is. I said, well, show it to me. And they were like, And then they went to Malachi, test me now on this. And I said, Malachi, in case you didn't know, was written 500 years before Jesus was born. There are no church tithing passages. But it's a popular concept because it helps generate income. And the 501c3 tax exemption in the IRS code, one of my best grades in law school at Georgetown, was my individual income taxation. Learned about 501c3, and every church that's incorporated under 501c3 gets to keep all the money that they earn from donations and tithing and not have to pay taxes on it. So if you knew that, would that be a powerful incentive for you to get into the religious game? So you can make a lot of money. If Satan didn't know any better, I think he was a brilliant military tactician. And he said, let's create a 501c3 so we can get guys that want to make money come into the church. And the guys like Paul and Stephen, who are willing to lay down their lives for the gospel, they aren't going to want to be mixed up with this stuff. But that's what we have. The vast majority of Christendom is 501c3, which means when the government says you got to get a needle thing or we're going to shut your church down, and if you don't, we'll take your tax exemption away, what are you going to do? You're going to do what the government tells you. But that was never the way it was. You don't see the church of the first century cooperating with Rome. You see Rome persecuting the church. And so that's where we're at. So I'd say keep your eyes open for this week, Tuesday, this UN meeting. On Sunday, I understand that there's going to be the funeral of Charlie Kirk, who's really a Christian martyr, It's going to be Sunday at 1, Sunday, day after tomorrow. I thought it was 1. It's going to be 11 o'clock Arizona time, and when I checked it, it said 1 p.m. Eastern.
I heard too.
But you're going to have the President of the United States. You're going to have it in a stadium. So whether or not, between you and me, I don't think President Trump is a born-again Christian. I just don't. He's a Presbyterian. He said he never had to pray to be... He's helpful for the church. He's much better than having Biden or Obama. But either way, the point is that funeral and the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the two-state solution coming up Tuesday and the possible rapture coming up on the feast is a perfect opportunity for those of us that are here to go out there into the world and plant our last few seeds of the gospel. At the end of the growing season, there won't be any more harvest, growing or planting. It'll be harvest time. And when we get to the Bema seat in heaven right after the rapture, we're all going to get a reward for all the seeds that we planted. Whether it grew up into eternal life or not, just the effort of trying is going to result, the Bible says, in a reward that will last forever. So,
I have a question,
Janet?
That's changing the subject completely.
Okay.
But I'm very curious about the young man that assassinated Charlie Kirk.
Now that's...
And where did he get trained?
So...
one shot.
That's interesting because I mentioned it just briefly.
This is... And then Candace Owens has made some interesting predictions.
Well, this is what I said on our broadcast last Saturday. I said, any of you guys in the last 2 weeks I've been talking about, MK Ultra. MK Ultra is a program that was adopted from the Nazis in Nazi Germany, the mind control scientists that were trying to create super soldiers, including trauma-based mind controls where you traumatize someone so much that you can create a mind control zombie. And they were making super soldiers and assassins. There's a program called Delta programming where you can create an assassin and he can look like a regular person and he won't even know he's part of the program until he gets a trigger word. And the trigger word could be any, and the movie The Manchurian Candidate, in fact, there were two of them, one made in 1962, but it couldn't get broadcast for 5 years because it was based upon the assassination of President Kennedy, which hadn't happened yet, and it was made by Frank Sinatra, who had been a friend of President Kennedy. And so some people think The Manchurian Candidate from 1962 was based upon the upcoming assassination of the President of the United States by a Manchurian candidate. And that whole Manchurian Candidate thing is, you know, Korean soldiers were taken captive by the Chinese communists and brainwashed. And when they came back to America, they were pro-communist. Why? Because they had been brainwashed. And so that's where the term Manchurian Candidate came from, because they would be taken to Manchuria, subjected to mind control. The Nazis had the same thing, and sadly enough, at the conclusion of World War II, because we wanted to make the world safe for capitalism and defeat communism, we gave visas and new identities to the Nazi mind control scientists and the Nazi rocket scientists, so we could beat the Russians to the moon, which we did. Some people say that we didn't. Yeah. And then we gave them new identities and put them in American universities. And so rocket science went through the roof. We caught up to the Russians in space and passed them and landed on the moon first. And in mind control science, including super assassins who were disguised as regular citizens, we apparently passed them as well. Mind control programming is usually supplemented. Delta programming, you can Google this. Delta programming is assassin programming. And Omega programming is the programming they give to the assassin if they get caught or if the mission goes wrong, so that they will self-delete themselves, which is why every time I see one of these crazy school shootings, before they can get the kid to trial, he shoots himself. You know, like wouldn't you think you would want to go on TV and say, the reason I did this because I believe in this, this, and this, but they usually don't. So when you ask who this guy that really killed Charlie Kirk was, with one shot, he hit an area the size of a quarter from 2 football fields away. Just one shot. Maybe MK Ultra is involved. Who knows? We'll find out, or maybe we won't, because remember.
Cooperating.
No, they said that he's a decoy and that Israel was the one that did it.
Well,
there's lots of.
Everybody blames Israel, but he may. Decoy is a possibility, but it wouldn't be the nation of Israel. Israel had invited him. Netanyahu had invited him to Israel 2 weeks before he was shot, because he had been a strenuous advocate for the nation of Israel. Now, Candace Owen, who hates Israel and is a Zionist, anti-Zionist, and a Jesuit, she's devout to the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church is devout to hating Israel because they want the Vatican. They want Rome to be the city of God, and they want to take over Jerusalem for the church. So you got this big funeral coming up, so you got evangelical Christians getting together with conservatives. You've got, you know, I think a bad element out there in the conservative wing trying to get Christians to commit crimes of violence against, you know, liberals and against alphabet letter people, which is what Satan wants, because he wants the church to look bad. So again, we should have our head on a swivel, but we should be watching. I'd say that Sunday.
I'll let you know that they do have 20 suspects already, and the two.
Oh, they do?
Yeah, 20 suspects.
Besides the
It's
one
a whole network of them, and there's 92 people on the list, along with Charlie was on the list.
Okay, so Max is saying
They have 20 suspects, plus the 2 bodyguards are on their suspects
That's
also.
what I just
They're
don't
suspects
understand
now.
with
They're suspects now.
the assassination.
Because they were
Especially
making
not even
almost
looking
the
on video.
assassination
And he did
of
look
Trump.
the guy with the glasses did look that way, and then he backed up.
Yeah.
And he knew the shot was coming. That's why he went like this.
Well, not
Otherwise,
only that,
he
but he
did it.
did some
Because he did the moving, the
Why
army
didn't
thing.
they check all those?
So
those
they're both on this,
high-rises?
and he was
Well-
there when Donald Trump got shot too. The same guy with the glasses. He was
what about
there
the
too.
old guy? The old guy that said
The old guy that
he
was-
confessed to the shooting
also
because he
had
wanted the
been
other guy to get away.
Yeah.
He's
So-
under investigation too.
So
There was 2 guys that did that.
if the term conspiracy theorist or conspiracy theory actually was coined by the CIA. CIA was created by the MK Ultra program. CIA didn't
I
exist.
don't know what that is.
MKUltra was the mind control program of the Nazis, and the mind control scientists that came to America under assumed identities that were paperclipped to a clipboard at Ellis Island, which is why the program was called Operation Paperclip, because you would hide the identity of the Nazi mind control and rocket scientists and bring them into America. But once they got them into America, they started using these experiments on American citizens, children, soldiers, to create their Manchurian Candidate. Not many people realize, though, that the term conspiracy theorist, which is used as sort of a term of derision to anybody that doesn't buy, the government's, narrative on, for instance, the Kennedy assassinations. John F. Kennedy was assassinated, they said, by Lee Harvey Oswald using a 1942 rifle that he ordered, a mail order rifle from World War II, from like 300 feet away, or 3 football fields behind President Kennedy. When we finally got to see the Zapruder film in the 70s, which wasn't released until 8 years, it had been tampered with, but even tampered with, you could see that the shot came from the front and pushed Kennedy back and to the left, back and to the left. And so the term conspiracy theory was coined by the Warren Commission. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, Earl Warren, was on the committee. The representative congressman from the state of Michigan who pardoned Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, was on that committee. And it was clear that their conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald was the only shooter, that's where that term magic bullet comes from. It said for him to have done that, that bullet had to be magic. It would have had to do a U-turn in space, hit Kennedy in the front of the head, then leave his body and go into the leg of Governor Connolly of Texas, who was in the front seat of the same limousine, and then go through the windshield twice, and then go across the street and hit a woman in the arm because somebody across the street got hit. Just one bullet. If there were more than one shooter, though, it would be a conspiracy. So they said anybody that thinks it was more than Lee Harvey Oswald is a conspiracy theorist, and that's where that term was coined. But having prosecuted many homicide cases, there's always, not always, but often more than one person involved. And I prosecuted cases where one guy was a shooter, but 2 other guys got life in prison too because they were part of the scheme to do the murder. And so conspiracy is a theory by which more than one person can be responsible for a bad act. So again, I think you guys are correct, Janet and Max, I think you guys are right in questioning what really happened with Charlie Kirk. Not many people know. Sirhan, by the way, who is supposedly the assassination of Robert Kennedy 5 years later, when he was about to become president of the United States, the shot that killed Robert Kennedy was behind his left ear from inches away because there was stippling, meaning the barrel was close to his back of his head. And Sirhan was standing where Max is over there to the front, about probably 12 to 15 feet away. So how did his bullet get to the back of Robert Kennedy's ear? Was his gun that he pulled out a distraction so nobody would see the guy coming from behind and deliver the kill shot, which is where assassins, they want to put it below the ear because it goes directly into the brain and doesn't get stopped by the skull. The skull is the thickest bone sheath that we have in our body. So you hit somebody with a round, and I've prosecuted cases again where people have survived being shot in the head with a gun. One domestic violence attempted murder I did, he shot his ex in the head and it tore off a chunk of her scalp about that big, and I saw the picture, and the skull was like that thick, but she didn't die because that skull protected. The brain was not damaged. The skull was damaged. But if you want to assassinate somebody, you put it behind the ear because that goes up under the helmet, which is the skull that protects the brain. So with that, any other final questions before we let you guys go for the night?
Well, my father 70 years ago used to tell that in this age a lot of homosexuals, because of the foods that we eat and the hormones and everything, and the chicken and the meat, and that's why we have a lot of people with problems. Also vaccines.
Well, can't say the word V on YouTube, but you're right. Yes,
Yeah.
sorry about that. You. But yes, I agree with you about food and hormones, and I'm a vegan myself, and I can tell you for sure, there's all kinds of hormones put in food, like phytoestrogens, soy, for instance. When I first became a vegetarian, I said eat soy because it's good for you, it's healthy, it's a great source of protein for non-meat eaters. Soy is basically edible form of estrogen. And the estrogenization of American males may be what's causing this whole transcontinental movement to be so profound amongst even elementary school kids all the way up to high school kids. When I was in elementary school, nobody wanted to be something than what they were born. Is it possible that the food and the chemicals and the things we're buying in the store, I read a report that said, the Stone Mountain Report, you Google that, I don't know if, internet's not really free anymore, but the Stone Mountain Report gives a narrative of a group of leaders, captains of finance and industry here in the United States in 1967 or 8, met together and were told, we're going to help you guys become the leaders of society. And there's a plan, and part of that plan included creating prisons, creating a genre of music that's going to cause African Americans to become more crime-ridden so we can put them in the prisons, and we're going to make the prisons for profit, not state-owned. And now we have for-profit prisons, but you need to get people in there to generate income. And then we're going to put stuff in the foods, and we're going to put stuff in the foods to make the men more passive and more effeminized. And we're going to promote alphabet letterism, because that's going to be able to make men less warlike and more easy to control. And then we're going to make the women more masculine and leaders, because women are more gullible, like Eve in the garden, and they can be controlled through flattery, and men can be controlled through weakness. And so that was a report that came out in 1968, that was going to be the plan going forward. And here we are in 2025, and goodness forbid, it seems almost as if that was a prophetic thing. That wasn't in the Bible, but it seems like that prophecy of that report has, in fact, come through. So, yeah, I tend to agree with you about that. So, we should watch what we eat and some of the stuff we do. So, all right, any other questions? Are we going to, all right, so we'll end it right there.
All right.
And that's it. Anybody want to give a quick 30-second closing prayer? We'll end it with prayer. So those of you guys haven't, like and subscribe. Thanks for joining us tonight, and we will see you very soon. And if the rapture happens, even sooner. God bless you guys.